democracy happens close to home. And I was looking at the theme for this year's convening, and I was like, oh, how appropriate. I didn't even plan. Oh, yes. Now you can much better see the slides, which are more meant to be inspiring rather than give you a bunch of information. Okay, let's get started. In theory. Oh, I have to turn the clicker on. Oh no, is it out of? There we go. Okay. There we go. I want to begin my remarks in a place that is actually very far away from this beautiful Saturday morning here in Connecticut. Outer space. On the evening of April 6th, just 5 weeks ago, an astronaut named Christina Koch became the first woman in history to view the Earth from the far side of the moon. She and her 3 crewmates, Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover, and Jeremy Hansen, were aboard the Orion spacecraft, which they had named Integrity. On that evening, they photographed something the rest of us had not seen with human eyes in more than 50 years. An Earthset, our planet rising and then setting behind the curve of the moon. I think that seeing the Earth from a distance, small, blue, and whole, for me at least, it reorders something inside of me. And I think for those of us who care to look, it is the closest any of us will ever come to seeing what we actually are and what our home is. So the mission was called Artemis II. It is the first time human beings have traveled beyond low Earth orbit since 1972. To date myself just a little, this was 14 years before I was born. Yes, I am turning 40 this year. So excited. The crew was in space for 10 days, and they traveled 694,481 miles. They returned home on April 10th, 2026, splashing down into the warm waters, relatively speaking, of the Pacific Ocean off the coast of San Diego. And they got there, and they got home by riding what NASA calls a free return trajectory. It is exactly what it sounds like, a path so precisely calculated within the fixed laws of physics that the moon's own gravity, once reached, would slingshot them back towards the Earth without needing another major engine burn. They did not fight gravity, they surrendered to it, and that surrender carried them home. So I'm a political scientist, I'm not a physicist. But I'm really low-key obsessed with space exploration and with physics, as it turns out. But I don't study it formally. I just learn about it in my free time because that's what nerds do. So specifically, my research focuses on the estimated 10,000 local election offices that administer voting across the United States. But I think that the act of voting and the free return trajectory taken by the Artemis crew actually share an architecture, that the same physics that carried 4 human beings around the moon and back are alive in every ballot we cast. And I actually don't mean this as metaphor, I mean it literally. The more and more I study democracy, and the more and more I nerd out about physics and space in my free time, I have come to understand that we live in a democratic universe, fundamentally. And that voting is one of the most precise ways human beings have ever uncovered to participate in it. So in 2020, I started this podcast, What Voting Means to Me. Over the course of a few years, I compiled just over a dozen episodes. I interviewed my students, election officials, and friends. And the podcast was bookended by 2 questions, and 2 questions alone. The interviews would open up with the question, what's your first memory of democracy? And so many people would say things like, oh, my parents took me to the polls, or I stayed up late, watching election night returns, or I went, campaigning, with my family. And we'd wend our way through each guest's democracy biography and land on the final titular question. What does voting mean to you? So I'm a busy professor. I was trying to get tenure. The podcast has since gone silent, but the episodes are still active on Spotify and Apple for anyone who is curious. These questions, though, have stayed with me, particularly the one at the heart of the show. What does voting mean to you? And what does voting mean? But perhaps more precisely, the question that I want to talk more about today is, what is the vote? So when I was invited to give these remarks by Laura, I was asked to consider how my research might inform the next generation of young leaders, but also inspire all of you. What we might do to encourage people to value voting and political participation again. I want to honor that invitation, but I'm going to do so by a decidedly unusual path. So over the next 25 minutes or so, I'm going to take you through 3 claims. 1, we live in a democratic universe. Our world, our universe, the very fabric of reality is inherently democratic. 2nd, that the fundamental answer to what voting is, not what it means something different for everyone, is that voting is the most precise expression we have of the structure of our democratic universe. It is the most precise expression we have because voting is agency, it is voice, and it is a way we can help return our communities to equilibrium. Finally, I'm going to make the claim that we do this work of realizing democracy most effectively close to home. We do the work of supporting the agency and the voice and the equilibrium returning capacity of the vote and political participation close to home. And I'll talk about how some of the people I see doing this work so faithfully are the local election officials across the United States and their staff and their volunteers. Our registrars and clerks here in Connecticut, they show us every day what a realized democratic universe looks like in practice. And they do so not through grand policy objectives or nationally recognized political movements, but the small daily acts at the local level that uphold our truly democratic universe and the act of voting that is at its center. So by the time I finish, I hope I will leave you with a different sense about what you and what every person from the younger generation is doing when they vote. Voting and political participation writ large, it's not just a duty, it's not a chore, it's not even just an expression of policy or candidate preferences, though all of those things are relevant. Voting is a homecoming. So now I want to talk about our democratic universe, and here's where I'm going to get a little bit nerdy about my strange side physics obsession. So I want to start with this claim that our universe is inherently democratic, and before I talk us through why I believe that is to be true, and how my research suggests that it is, I want to sort of lay out some groundwork. 1, physicists know that the universe is in constant movement. Nothing is still. So if we accept that premise, we have to then accept that time is what we call the experience of that movement from within. I move my hand from here to here. There's some measurement of time that can capture that movement. And what is movement? What is movement? At its very foundation, it is the negotiation of objects. Particles, planets, plants, animals, and people existing, interacting alongside one another in space and time. So in this sense, I feel that democracy is not a human invention. It's a human realization. It's a realization of how the universe moves made conscious and intentional through something that only we have, choice and free will. Democracy is what happens when the negotiation that's always happening within the universe, in our backyards and in the forests and in the bee colonies and with the birds, when this negotiation that happens more or less automatically and without choice becomes something we practice as conscious, self-aware human beings. So this is a big claim, but there is a physics underneath it, and I want to talk broad strokes overview about what physics and mathematics can tell us about this. A century ago, physicists believed reality was a collection of objects with definite properties. This pencil is here, my phone is here, this clicker is here, you are all here in this room. At the quantum level, the belief that what made an electron, for those of you who might remember high school physics, was a set of features just built into it that was present, and we just have to measure it. We just have to find the right tool to measure it. And so in this sense, the job of the physicists, like other scientists, was to just find ways to measure and describe what was already there. So then, in 1965, 5 years before our moon landing, and 8 before our final return to the moon until the Artemis mission, a physicist by the name of John Bell did something extraordinary. He took the assumption that reality is pre-given, that objects have definite characteristics or properties, whether or not we are looking at them, and he's like, let's turn this into a mathematical statement. And he did so, and he gave us a way to test it. And in the decades that have followed, the test has been run and rerun and run again. And every time the result is the same. Reality at its foundation, at that quantum level, is not pre-given. It's not a collection of objects with fixed properties waiting to be discovered. It is a network of relationships. Particles do not exist independently of one another. Properties, even something as basic as, how do we locate this electron? Where is it? That comes into existence through interaction, through relationship. And another physicist by the name of Carlo Rovelli has spent his career making this case, and he called it relational quantum mechanics. Reality is constituted by relationships and by negotiation, by the encounter between one thing and another. And that, to me, feels deeply democratic. So I want to return to where I started. If reality is constituted by interaction, if there are no isolated objects, only relationships, then a stable reality, a stable democracy, is one where those interactions are able to continue as themselves. A stable reality is one in which the negotiation among its parts remains open and unconstrained. So a stable universe, in this sense, is a democratic universe. And democracy, what we do to govern ourselves, our relationships with one another in space and time, I don't see this as a system that's imposed on this reality. I feel like it's just another iteration of it. So to reiterate, it is the movement of the universe made conscious, sentient, and intentional. That is democracy. When we negotiate how to live next to one another, when we deliberate, when we listen, when we cast a ballot, we are doing so with awareness and free will. What everything from quantum particles to animals and plants do automatically, or at least in their own way. We are participating knowingly in the most fundamental activity there is, relationship. And here's the last piece I want to bring to the table before I move on to voting, specifically. This is the piece that has most fundamentally shaped my research. I've drawn from work by complexity scientists like Neil Thies, to writers, thinkers, and feminists like Adrienne Marie Brown in her book Emergent Strategy, to develop this idea. Our world is fractal and coherent. The universe does not negotiate from a central command. There's no cosmic chairman or authoritarian president gaveling sessions to order. The negotiation happens locally, at every scale, all the time. A particle interacts with the particles immediately surrounding it. A cell interacts with its neighbors. A neuron with the neurons it touches. Fungi and trees interact in the forest to create an ecosystem of support and care. And out of those local interactions, a wholeness emerges, a coherent universe, a living body, and a thinking mind. Complexity scientists call this fractal coherence. These are the same patterns of negotiation repeating at every scale, generating wholeness without anyone designing the wholeness from above. So if our democratic universe is stable, it is because it is fractal. It is because there is fractal coherence. But as far as we know, it's only human beings that have the capacity to behave in ways that defy the fractal coherence of the universe by imposing authoritarian order and seeking to control expression outside of that order. This is the architecture I study in my research, not in particles or cells, but in the roughly 10,000 local election offices that administer voting in this country. And fractal resilience is what I call it when it shows up in human institutions. Self-similar practices repeated across a complex system, generating coherence without central design at the local level close to home. And it's not lost on me, if I may, that the League of Women Voters is structured very similarly, with its local chapters, its state chapters, and its national chapters. So well done on realizing the democratic nature of the universe. It is, in a way, the same pattern the universe has been running from the very beginning. We can't forget, though, that fractal deviation is only possible because of the human conscious mind, that authoritarianism seeks to impose order where we should allow and surrender, like the Artemis crew did to the laws of gravity. So this leaves us with more questions, of course. If we are conscious, sentient, intentional participants in a universe that has been negotiating itself into existence since the beginning of time, what does it mean for us, who have free will and choice, to negotiate well? What does it look like at the human scale to do consciously what the universe has just been doing all along? And that brings us to voting. So of all the things human beings do to participate in the making of a better world, every form of speech, every act of governance, every protest, every rally, every call to an election official, voting, I argue, is the most precise expression we have ever invented of conscious participation in the democratic universe. It is not sufficient, no, but it is necessary. I use the word precise deliberately. Voting is precise because it does three things at once. It is an act of agency, it is an exercise of voice, and it is one of the principal ways our communities have of returning ourselves to equilibrium, to balance when we have drifted from it, which is something that happens in nature all the time. So I want to take each one of these in turn and elaborate. Voting as agency. When particles interact, they do not choose to do so. They negotiate in the way I described earlier. They enter into relationship with one another, they're shaped by one another's properties, and they bring a new reality into being when they encounter themselves. But they're not aware. They're not aware they are making a choice, therefore they don't choose in the same way that we do. There's a negotiated path that happens based on their properties. Plants, similarly, respond to light, to water, to the chemistry of their neighbors, their own version of consciousness, not choosing as we do, but still negotiating. And we now know, take a forest for example, that this is a complex network of trees and fungi and roots that communicate with one another and support one another. Bees, I feel, are perhaps the clearest illustration of our democratic universe outside of humanity. And it's just a total myth that they are governed by a queen bee. She's like the motivating force. She's the one that keeps the colony going, but this is a self-governing group of beings. Bees actually engage in deliberation. Research shows this, democratic deliberation. They have their own form of agreement. We've established that they also disagree, that they debate. on major hive decisions like where to locate their new home. But there's a really important distinction to reiterate again here, is that they're not aware. They're not aware that they're making a choice, as far as we know. Human beings have the power of choice. It is the gift and the burden of human consciousness. We can step into negotiation that has been happening since the beginning of time. We can do it on purpose, and we can bend reality to our will. Voting, then, is one of the most concentrated forms of conscious choice we have ever designed. Every ballot cast is a willed act, a moment when human free will registers itself in writing in a system, I feel, literally constructed to receive it. And yes, the system, as it stands right now, is deeply flawed, but is still designed to receive choices. It is still designed to receive our votes at this moment. And the architecture of an election is, at its heart, a vast act of listening to those choices. A system built for the express purpose of registering with precision what we have chosen. So now I want to go back to the claim that voting is an expression of voice. I said that it is only people, as far as we know, have the capacity to behave in ways that defy the fractal coherence of the universe. One way we do this I have already touched on, in relationship and collectively, through authoritarian behavior, by seeking to impose rigid order where it's not natural, and this is a hallmark of authoritarian regimes. But another more quiet way that we do this, by defying the fractal coherence of the universe, is by collapsing. When we are afraid of losing our job, our standing, our place at the table, our safety, our lives, we shrink. And I think as women, we know this with particular acuity. We might speak more quietly. We might say things to keep us safe, even when that thing is not true. And this is human. We have all done it. I have done it. But every time this happens, the universe loses a signal it would have otherwise received. The negotiation that has been running since the beginning of time loses one of its inputs. And the secret ballot, as we know, and there's a beautiful book of ballot design back there that I encourage folks to check out, is a structural protection against this. It is the architecture written into law that says in this booth, in this envelope, no one can require you to be smaller than you are. No one, not your employer, not your husband, not your father, not the loudest voice in your community can compel you to register a choice that is not your own. And so the vote is the act of bringing yourself into the negotiation. Whatever you believe most deeply about your community, about the people you love, about the future you want, you can register something imperfectly but intact without anyone watching. And yes, I know our choices feel increasingly deeply flawed. And there is work to do more than ever to address the quality and coherence of the actual choices we can make when we mark the ballot. Most of the spaces we move through on a given day ask us in small ways and large to be a version of ourselves that is more convenient for someone else. But I don't think the ballot does. The choices on that ballot may, yes, but the actual thing that the ballot represents asks only for our voice. And I think that bees, too, here again, offer a really useful illustration. I'm also apparently a nerd for bees, so, there's just lifelong learning here. I think they provide some insight into how we can reclaim the quality of our voice. So, this is more science. If you visualize the sound of 10,000 bees buzzing in their natural habitat, not in an artificial hive box or with human intervention, and then you look at the visualization of a human voice, someone who is in nature, deeply connected with nature, understands nature, the pattern is the same. Finally, voting as a return to equilibrium. So complexity scientists tell us that every complex system, from a cell, a forest, a body, a community, stays alive by sensing itself, by receiving information from its parts. This is what a fever is, for example. If you are sick and you have a fever, that is your body's attempt to try and return you to equilibrium. When a complex system stops listening, though, it doesn't stay coherent for long. it begins to drift and eventually breaks down. And voting is one of many, but I feel it is the most precise feedback mechanism by which we bring ourselves back to equilibrium. Each ballot is a signal sent from one of the parts to the whole. When the signals are counted freely and fairly, when they are received, summed, and honored, in a way that community, be it a local election here in Connecticut or a national election for president, has sensed itself. And this is what I mean at the deepest level when I think of voting as an act of homecoming. So homecoming in this case is not stillness. It is not arrival at a place that never changes. The universe is movement. We have already said this. Equilibrium is not stasis. It is a dynamic state in which all the parts remain in conversation with the whole. It is the condition that allows a system to keep moving and evolving without falling apart. Yes, again, the choices that we have can be deeply flawed. Yes, the architecture by which representation accrues through the vote, the structural problems of partisan and racist gerrymandering, the two-party system, and candidate choices remain, but these, I don't think, are reflections of a coherent system. They're deviations from a democratic universe that we are returning to. But when you vote, you are participating in the act by which a community keeps itself in conversation with itself. You are sending a needed signal to maintain system coherence. You are doing, with awareness and free will, what every complex system in the universe has been doing since the beginning of time, y'all, but what only conscious beings can do on purpose. So we have voting as agency, voice, and equilibrium. These three qualities taken together, in my perspective, make voting the most precise expression we have ever uncovered. I'm not going to say invented, that we have uncovered of conscious participation in a democratic universe. But this precision of the vote does not make a system work alone. Outside of the issues with our two-party system and gerrymandering challenges and all of the other structural issues that plague our democracy, we still have the vote, and someone has to receive that signal. Someone has to count the ballots. Someone has to make sure, to the best of their ability and with the best of intention, each a voice arrives intact in a room where they can be heard. Someone has to design, run, and protect the architecture of listening. And this brings us to local election officials, the people I have spent the last 8 years studying. So when people cast their ballots into democracy, there needs to be an architecture in place to receive the signal. And in the United States, this is what the architecture looks like. 50 states, an estimated 10,000 offices, and I say it estimated because there's some discrepancy in terms of overlapping office duties. This is that decentralized architecture. In the United States, with the oversight and support of state governments, the Election Assistance Commission, thousands of democracy stakeholders, academics like myself, nonprofits like the League of Women Voters, they're supporting the work of local election offices. Some of these offices are large and professional, they have full-time staff, but the vast majority are small. Many are run by a handful of people, often part-time, often supplemented by volunteers who give their evenings and weekends to make an election happen. Every single one of us who has been a voter indirectly knows these people. Some of you in this room may have worked alongside them. Some of you are them, or have. Is anyone in here been or is currently working as an election official? Yes! Oh my God, let's talk. Oh, thank you for your work. Thank you for your work. So I want to bring things to a close here by telling you what 8 years of this research has taught me about election officials and their staff, their wonderful staff and their volunteers, why they do this work, and what they show us about our democratic universe in practice, not in theory. So there's a group of scholars that I work with who study election officials. Some of you in this room may have received surveys from Paul Gronke at Reed College or the Brennan Center for Justice. Yep. What we know, nods, okay, thank you. We know that local election officials are not, on average, well paid. You're like, duh. We also know that the vast majority of them are women.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. They're not necessarily well known, and if they are, I'm looking at Stephen Richer out in Maricopa County, Arizona, although he's no longer there, they're not known in a way that feels good. They're not in most communities going to be the subject of a town parade, but in my opinion, they should headline every single parade. But they do the work anyway, through their communications with voters, each other all the time at conferences. I've tried to parse out why they do this work. And I've done so in so many different ways. One of the major approaches that I've taken is to, and it's imperfect, it's incomplete, for those election officials who are on social media. I have collected all of their handles, and since 2020 have, with my research team, reviewed about 120,000 individual pieces of content shared by them. And so it's like really hard to come up with something to illustrate their truths about why they do this work. But I feel like this quote, and this was from a statement signed by 108 Illinois county clerks and election authorities, one of my former home states, Illinois. The quote reads, "Local election officials in Illinois have the responsibility of being defenders of democracy. These activities are not conducted by some faceless bureaucrat in a secret centralized office far from your home, but rather by individuals who shop at your local supermarket, have children in school with your kids, and are located in offices you can easily visit. Our actions cannot be dictated to us by any state legislator, congressional leader, president, and especially no foreign government. Your local election official is only accountable to you, the citizens of the local jurisdiction we serve." Now, I want to highlight something. This is not the language of partisanship. It's not even the language of policy, though local election officials also do an incredible job of talking about policy. It's the language of vocation, of work that is being done because the work matters. And so when I've seen these officials describe over and over again in their words, in their social media posts and press releases and interviews, I see them describing a sense of being entrusted with something that is precious. Not their candidate, not their party, but the act itself, the act of voting, the act of being heard, the act of returning the community to conversation with itself. They are the people who hold that architecture of listening to voice open. So here's what I think is just so cool about the work of election officials. In the United States, a little bit of a structural lesson, I think many of you in this room probably know this. We have Article 1, Section 4, Clause 1, which dictates the running of elections to the states, who in then turn dictate the actual implementation of laws to local election authorities, with variation in oversight and what that looks like from state to state. State legislators pass election law, state election law offices oversee, and Congress does from time to time pass legislation. But there's no national curriculum on the philosophy of democratic service. There's no, as far as I know, formal training, at least consistently, about why this work matters and how to do it, especially when it comes to how officials communicate with their voters. Yet, when you look at the language of election officials, from the smallest jurisdiction of the country, Loving County, Texas, with 100 voters, to the largest, Los Angeles, with 6 million, you hear the same language, you hear the same values, you hear officials in towns of 3,000 people describing their work in a register akin to officials in cities of 3 million. People have a right to participate in free and fair elections, to be able to cast their ballots privately and independently, to be confident that their votes counted as intended, and that the outcomes reflect the voice of the people. These phrases show up everywhere. No one is handing them down. They emerge from this work in relationship. And so this is what I mean by fractal resilience. Self-similar democratic practices repeated across a complex system, generating coherence without central design. So this is akin to the architecture the universe has been running since the beginning of time, running right now through the work of 10,000 public offices across the United States. And when I say we live in a democratic universe and that universe is most fully realized close to home, this is not metaphor, this is empirical, this is observable. I have spent the last 8 years measuring it. So I have to bring some harder truths into this room. Local election officials are still under pressure. They still receive threats. Many are considering leaving the profession. The architecture of listening, the thing that makes the cosmic claim of this talk true on the ground in our country, is being tested. And so now I want to talk about how I think all of this speaks to the next generation. I would tell a young person this. This is the kind of work in this country that is largely invisible. It does not pay well, it does not make you famous, at least not in ways that we want to be famous. It will not at best even make you popular in your own town, and at worst it can make you the subject of derision and threat. But it is a form of work that is actively and structurally holding a democratic universe together and open at the level where ordinary people live close to home. And so this is what it means to participate in democracy. Volunteer in your community. Volunteer for your local League of Women Voters chapter. Put your hands in the soil in your community garden. Volunteer with your church group. Take time to visit your local election office and thank them for their work. Make a meal for a friend. Buy coffee for a stranger. And perhaps most importantly, just sit down and listen to someone who needs to share. Connect with your community and encourage everyone you love, near and far, to do so, because collectively this means you're already doing it. You're already a part of the fractal that only grows more resilient for your efforts. And if you want a vocation that matters, that is not abstract, that is not far away, that is not waiting for permission from a national party or a national stage, there are 10,000 offices across the country that have opportunities for you. It is not lost on me that according to nearly, again, a decade of survey data, the majority of local election officials are women. And here I am speaking to a room full of women who are members of the League of Women Voters. And across the towns in Connecticut, there might be clerks and registrars who are nearing the end of the work they have loved for decades. Many of them are women. Many of them may be looking for someone to teach. Many of them might be wondering whether anyone will step forward to do what they have done. And so I would tell young people this, and I guess I tell us all of this. One of the most cosmically, fundamentally human democratic things you can do is take time to help count ballots. Volunteer to work the polls, take a seasonal job in your election office, serve as a poll watcher for the League of Women Voters that I did when I was a graduate student in Chicago, to ensure that your fellow citizens can access the ballot with dignity and privacy. All of these efforts are physical ways in which you can help make sure your neighbors' voices arrive intact, to hold open in your one corner of the country the architecture by which the universe democratically negotiates itself into being. So, I can't talk to this wonderful group without talking about the women's suffrage movement. And I want to share a very short passage from a book by the poet Adrienne Rich. It's a book of her prose entitled On Secrets, Lies, Secrets, and Silence. And in her prologue, she reflects on the women's suffrage movement. She writes, in October of 1902, Susan B. Anthony mourned the death of Elizabeth Cady Stanton, her organizing companion for 50 years with whom she had laid out political strategy and speeches, traveled from town to town organizing a suffrage meeting, faced abuse, degradation, and indignation, slander. Together, they argued, they disagreed, and persevered through the bonds of unremitting love and loyalty. Surrounded by reporters at Stanton's deathbed, Anthony's cry of impatience still strikes a chord for many. How shall we ever make the world intelligent of our movement? Susan B. Anthony understood that the demand for the ballot was a radical demand, not simply because she hoped that women voters would use their votes to change the lives of women, but because she sensed a profound and perverse symbolism embodied in the denial of suffrage to women. We have only to read Anthony's published letters, papers, and speeches to recognize that she was a remarkable political philosopher who deeply loved and was loved by women and drew on that love for her strength and persistence, never compromising upon the radical symbolism of the constitutional amendment for which she fought for a lifetime and whose ratification she did not live to see. And so I think about that question that Anthony laid out on Stanton's deathbed. And I feel like it's in some ways the question, or a version of it, that I asked my podcast guests all those years ago. What does voting mean, and how shall we make the world intelligent of it? And I think in Anthony's tireless devotion to suffrage, she understood, even if she didn't have the words or my obsession with quantum physics, that the ballot was the democratic nature of our world and universe realized. We're so close to the end here. Sorry, y'all. Oh, there we go. Okay. In the work of local election offices across the United States driven by women, I see that same tireless drive, the recognition that the ballot is the foundation of democratic freedoms and a form of governance that coheres with the nature of the universe writ large. Again, it is not sufficient, but it is necessary. And so I return to the question I posed at the beginning of the keynote, which bookended every podcast, the question I have carried with me all of these years: what does voting mean to you? And it's going to mean something different for every person who casts a ballot. It's your voice, after all. But the underlying function is universal. Voting sends a signal. It keeps the negotiations open. It is a part of how we return our communities to themselves. It is how we come home. And if you need inspiration for what this looks like in practice, look no further than your local election office. These are the people, led by women, who show us what a realized democratic universe looks like. Not in theory, in practice. Every day, at the local level, together, fractally resilient. And, oh, come on. Oh no. It's like I want somebody to push the button. You know what? Yes. Yeah. Close to home. Thank you so much. Oh, it's exactly
questions?
11:15, yes.
Question? Hold on, I'm gonna walk around with the mic. Are you gonna walk around with the mic? Thank you. Somebody over there. I'm gonna turn the lights back on.
I found that really fascinating, especially the quantum physics.
I am not a quantum physicist. This is just like something I do in my free time.
And I understand the concept that my vote is my voice.
Yeah.
And I join with the voices of others, and that creates an environment, for lack of a better term. To be more specific, you mentioned the gerrymandering and shoving us all into, like we were talking earlier about the number of competitive races in this country is down to
7, something
right?
so low. 13.
Yeah. I'm also fascinated by the fact that there are now these kind of independent candidates in various places that are trying to break through out of that mold. And I just was curious how you see that.
Yeah. I'm going to take the gerrymandering bit first, which is maddening to me if you haven't sort of picked up on that. Because it is, as you said, political forces trying to box us into a situation where we don't have, that voice means little. I think the thing that I also think about, though, is that they can redraw the districts, but human voices are malleable, and so this is not something that has like a silver bullet solution. It requires the kind of organizing, and quite frankly, party organizing that more progressive movements, we have work to do. We have work to do. And so, of course, I don't have an easy answer for that, other than to say I've never seen redistricting as a sort of determinism, if that makes sense. But it's still maddening. It's frustrating. And to your second question, or sorry, could you remind me the second part of your question?
Just these kind of interesting independent candidates.
Yes. Something that I have been observing mostly from the periphery, because I'm obviously very obsessed with my work, is the thing that not only candidates but third parties are doing, like the Working Families Party. Many of us, I'm assuming, are familiar with the Working Families Party, of working within the two-party system, which is structural. I always get this question of, when are we going to have a multi-party system? It's like, when the Constitution changes. It's just the first past the post system really lends itself to that. I'm not going to go into a whole lecture on proportional representation. But I look at the work that both technically third-party organizations are doing within the established party system, and then, of course, these individual candidates, and it gives me great hope, because that is the fractal part of the fractal resilience. Zohran Mamdani is the mayor of one of the largest cities in the country, and that's a really big fractal, and that's really impactful. And I just read that he balanced a budget and didn't cut any social services. What? Amazing, amazing. And so I think that like together I see how we respond to things like, I'll say it, like authoritarian gerrymandering. It happens at the local level. And I think that's the other thing that I didn't squeeze in there was this conversation about how more than ever, getting people excited about what's happening in your state and in your locality, it matters so much. States are protecting. Connecticut, as far as I know, just passed, I believe, one of the most protective immigration measures in the country.
Yeah.
In part, probably due to the work of many of you in this room. That's not nothing. And so I think that looking at the national picture, it's important to keep an eye on it, but remember that like you are most impactful. I mean, I think everyone is that you are most impactful at the local level and close to home. So I wish I had more hopeful answers.
I have a question about the local election officials. How has that changed over the last 10 or 15 years? And do they have a support system where they can discuss issues with each other?
Yeah. And I would love, I'm going to offer just what I've observed, and then maybe we could give them, if there's a local election official in the room who would like to share their experiences, I think that would be more resonance. But what I will say briefly, the short answer is yes. I'm a part of a monthly group that meets, it's called the Election Community Network, and it's election officials, academics. For those officials in the room who want to join, get my contact info, I will sign you up. If you're just interested in joining in general, it's a nonpartisan organization where we look at research and we talk about latest developments in nonprofits. Especially post-2020, we have seen an increase in coordinated efforts to support and help the mental health of election officials as well. But if there are any election officials who would like to share their own experience, because I'm looking at this from the outside, so, you know, not to put any pressure, but yeah.
Thanks. The one thing that many of you probably already know is that registrars of voters have ROVAC, okay, which is the Registers of Voters of Connecticut Association. It is a godsend, all right. When Laurel Anderson vacated the registrar's office in Trumbull, and I got it, okay, after a very short interval with someone else in the office. The one thing she said to me was, get active in ROVAC.
Yes.
And it has been a godsend. And there are times when the Secretary of the State's office, which is our nominal director, all right, has been way off base. Not always, but sometimes. And ROVAC has worked as a counterbalance, and thank God we've got it.
Just
a question. What's your opinion of ranked choice voting?
Oh my goodness. Let me see how I'm going to parse my response into sort of two identities. As a person, like, heck yes. As like an individual, yes. As an academic, it's not that my position is a no, it's just that I recognize that it requires a big education effort. So, you know, sample ballots and how to mark the ballots, and so it's something that I desperately want. And I'm seeing a head shaking no.
Oh, God. It's bad enough getting our results in on election night.
Yes, yes.
Well, I think we would have to change our constitution.
Yes,
Yeah.
and for something
how
like
hard
that to happen, it requires.
Sorry, I was just going to say,
Oh, yeah.
Jean, let's just take as a supposition, like I'm an economist, a supposition that the machines can be coded
Yes.
to read the results.
All right, you first of all have ballot design problems,
Correct.
not so
There's all
much
kinds
in
of issues,
national
right,
years,
yeah.
but in local years, Trumbull has 20 columns already,
I know.
and it's just yes, no. If you have to rank choice every column, the ballot's going to be several
Let's
pages.
talk about it as a concept.
All right.
As a
concept, I've got a problem with it, in that ranked choice voting can be jiggered by a candidate who's got the ability and the time, so that neither the first nor the second nor the third choice candidate necessarily wins. You can work it out with ranked choice so that the person who actually ends up, all right, sorry, The person who ends up with the rank highest number of votes as people are eliminated is nobody's primary choice.
Well,
All right.
that's how ranked choice voting works.
That is how ranked choice voting is not supposed to work, but there's been some academic work that's been done out of Boston where they looked at this, and it can be done. You have to have a fairly sophisticated team messing with people's choices. But if you get people to vote for their primary choice and then convince them to vote for something else for their second or third or fourth choice, you can do it. You can screw the system. All right, so just on that basis alone, I've got a real problem. With ranked choice voting, you can end up, even without persons screwing the system, you can end up with the person who's in charge of your local district or your local board of finance or whatever it is being nobody's first choice. It's hard enough to govern when you've got at least a plurality. With ranked choice voting, that's not a guarantee.
Yeah, and it sort of makes me sort of go back to my very brief comment about proportional representation, in which, again, this require massive constitutional overhaul. But Jean's point is, and I've talked with election administrators about this, the implementation of it in and of itself is complicated. And so if you want to make this change, it's amazing to advocate for it if it's something that you believe in, but it's really important to talk to the people who are in charge of implementing it. And also have broader conversations about, like Jean was saying, unintended consequences.
Yeah.
We saw the New York mayoral campaign. There was this really lovely little commercial that was between Zoran and, I'm forgetting the name of the sort of second choice person.
Brad Lander.
Yes. And that's one of the sort of beautiful implications of ranked choice. You sort of see these forms of communicating with the public that are less combative, and that's really, really great. But it is a complex conversation that needs to be had before it's something that we would propose, nationwide.
We have 2 questions. Do we have room for any more than that? Okay. And I just wanted to insert my ranked choice voting bit. It's very possible to kind of jigger any system, but as we have it right now, you get somebody you might not necessarily care for or somebody you loathe, and that needs to change.
Yes. That's the separate from the ballot being the voice, the choices we have to represent our voice.
Thank you. That was a very interesting presentation. So, if I get the gist of it correctly, nature naturally selects democracy.
I feel
now,
so.
I think looking at the natural world, that's something that's not done on a 4-year basis. They pretty much do that every day. Every day is a negotiation. Every day is an interaction. So my question is, based on your theory, what do you think is the best time lapse between elections so that people can actually be happy more of the time instead of every 4 years or 6 years? You actually can negotiate on a more regular basis and end up something with closer to what you want.
I love this question. I'm going to think about it for just a split second. I can't say that I would give a definite 1 year or 2 years, a specific time frame. I think it both involves reconsidering those time frames, but also reconsidering what we mean by democratic negotiation and thinking about sort of the actions that we take in our everyday lives as a function of democratic negotiation in between those election periods. This question as to whether I think it's do we need more opportunities? I mean, there's always an election happening somewhere. I mean, off cycle and primaries and special elections, and the joke I always make is the election for water ordinance district number 12. There's always an election happening. And so I think that, outside of the national picture of 2 years for Congress, 4 years for president, and then even at the state level, I would like to see more people care about what happens in their local elections. We're debating this road expansion in Avon right now, and it got very spirited a couple of years ago, and it was lovely to participate in. So I know that's kind of a non-answer, but I don't know if I have a specific timeline in mind.
Thank you. It's a terrific presentation. I think my question goes under your comment about authoritarianism is not natural.
Yes.
When you see a community and when you hear that there's a high voter registration in this community, but they're not voting because they don't see any change.
Yes. Yes.
What are your thoughts about that? Have you written about it? What can we do?
Most of my written work is like, the boring empirical academic research articles. So it's not something that I've written about, but it's something that I've thought a lot about and something that I speak a lot about in my classroom. And I think that on the one hand, that apathy does reflect the sense that one is living in a predetermined system. One is living in a system that is controlled and rigid, in which the outcomes are predetermined. Speaking of gerrymandering and redistricting. And that is inherently going to be destabilizing. That's the what I kept pointing to of like, we have this democratic architecture and it's like being stifled. It's like it's in a pot that's trying to constrict it. And so, again, this is another one of those questions for which I don't have the deus ex machina type answer about what we do about that particular community. For example, a high number of registered voters, but they're not voting. And I think this also brings me to this question that I just think so much about, which is like, what does voting mean to you? And what does voting mean, and what is the function of voting? And for me, it's as close to a religion as I get.
Yeah.
Like, it is sacred. And I think that change in that respect, in addition to addressing all of these structural challenges that are stifling sort of the natural expression of our democratic world, that is work that is ongoing. That is work the League of Women Voters is doing. That is work that other advocacy groups are doing. We are seeing the harbingers of hopeful change popping up in small ways and big ways across the country. Bless you. But I also feel that needs to be reconnected with something more foundational, not just like civic education, but education about what democracy is and why it matters and why it is so human. Because the more people you can get to think, okay, like, damn, these choices really suck, but
Yeah.
I'm gonna go and register, even if it's a write-in vote, I'm gonna go and register my voice because I'm doing something that is like one of the most human and universal things I can do. And you don't even have to speak about how that's the antithesis of authoritarianism. Sometimes I think it's better if we have to name it, but we can't fixate on it. We have to sort of imagine what a democratic future might look like. And we can't do that by constantly defining ourselves in opposition to what it is not. Yeah, I'll pull in on that. Thank you, it was such an honor, such an honor. Thank you. Oh, one more question. Yes, oh yeah, I mean, please, by all means, I'm a professor, man, I can do this all day.
Nice way to end it, but
Yeah.
I thank you for your talk, and it got me thinking about how, and I worked on a primary, and there was a lot of ignorance among
Yeah.
the public, and you made me thinking, like, sustaining democracy through community, because we're now everything's so global and visual, and everybody's seeing the age of communication and everything, that it's not sustainable because, like you said, there's no structured curriculum standard to define it.
Yes.
So it's like a secret.
Yes.
And this, I think, we're in this moment
Yes.
to make it happen.
Yes. Yes, if I may, I completely agree. That also deserves like a round of applause. I was recently commissioned to write a piece for the Wall Street Journal about what could go right in the United States over the next 25 years. And I pointed to election officials and I pointed to their work of supporting democracy, and it was shot down because it was too political. I still got paid for it, so like whatever. But anyway, you are absolutely correct that this is the moment. I think y'all have lunch waiting for you. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you. Thank you so much.